A very warm welcome to all the students. In today's session, we're going to discuss on the topic, how do organisms reproduce? Of course, reproduction is a basic and the fundamental unit of all the living organisms. So when you take from the microscopic, all bacteria, it might be viruses, every organisms reproduce. So reproduction is very common right from the microscopic organisms. So when you take the plants propagate or they reproduce in many ways. So in this chapter, we're going to learn about the different kinds of reproduction, that is right from the plants, right from the microscopic, macroscopic, and also how reproduction takes place in higher organisms, especially in human beings. So before we could go into the topic, first you need to understand what is reproduction is. Yes? So reproduction is nothing but it is a biological process by which new individuals or new offsprings are obtained from the parents. And this is one of the important and the mandatory and a fundamental part of a living organisms. So without reproduction, life on earth is not possible. So can we get into the topic? So in this chapter, we'll be discussing about asexual reproduction, sexual reproduction, especially how the asexual reproduction takes place in different categories, like right from amoeba, like from paramecium, from hydra, and so on. And of course, when you take about the sexual reproduction, we're going to see how sexual reproduction takes place in man, and also the menstrual cycle, and all the functions of the organisms in which helps in the process of reproduction. So can we get into the topic, children? So reproduction can be again categorized under two heads, that is asexual reproduction and sexual reproduction. So what is asexual reproduction? Here, in this reproduction, single individual gives rise to new individual. That is, here only one cell is involved in the process. And of course, the gametes here are not involved in asexual reproduction, or gametes are not formed. They are not formed in asexual reproduction. New individuals is identical to parents. When you talk about the new individuals, they are just the same and they are identical to the parents. And it is here rapid multiplication in the cells can be noted here. It's very common, especially in the lower categories of animals, which involves the hydra, then it involves the spirogyra, the planaria. All this involves the asexual reproduction. Let's concentrate what is sexual reproduction is. As the term sexual reproduction, here two cells are involved, or the two individuals are involved. That is, one male and one female are needed to give rise to a new individual or a new offspring. As a result, gametes are formed. And when you take the offsprings, especially the new individuals, they are exactly identical, or they are generally same, but they are not identical to their parents. Maybe the characters, maybe the traits, they may resemble from their parents or from the four grandfathers or from the great grandfathers. So the trait, the DNA, I already told you, the DNA is one of the important element which plays a vital role in the human beings. Especially it carries the genetic information from one generation to another. I already told you. So here also the new individuals is genetically similar, but they are not identical to their parents. Hence, they carry only the trait, the characters, the phenotype, the phenotypic characters, especially the tall, the short, the color, the eye color, the hair color, everything follows right from one generation to another. Hence, It is very, very useful to produce various variation in the species. And this type of sexual reproduction is specially adopted by the higher organisms. So this is the difference between an asexual reproduction and a sexual reproduction. So did you all know that do organisms create the exact identity? And the answer is yes. Yes, the organisms create the exact copies or the exact identity of themselves. But in the cases of asexual reproduction, the chances of variation are very, very high. What is variation is? So far we saw why do the organisms create an exact identity. We said that it is very, very essential because the chances of variation, especially in sexual reproduction, is very, very high in the case of the higher organisms. So what is variation is? Variation can be defined as the difference between, it is a difference between the individual of a species or a group of organism of a species, and that is called as a variation. So I repeat again, normally a variation can be defined as a difference. It can be different, can be any difference, okay? A difference may be the color, the height, everything comes under the variation. So it defines the variation, especially the particular differences in an individual or in a group of an organism of any species, and that is called as the variation. So you can define variation under another category called the environmental variation. What is the environmental variation? The difference again that is caused by the environmental factors. What are the environmental factors? Like the temperature, like the sunlight, then like the cold, the rain, all this causes environmental variation. Now, these factors are called as the environmental variation. This variation never stops, okay? It keeps passing on from the parents. It keeps passing on from the parents to the offsprings. Through what? Through gene. Gene, because gene is only a possible process by which the organism passes the trait or passes the character from one generation to another, especially during the process of reproduction. And this process is called as the inherited variation. So these are the fundamental units or the fundamental processes which happens during the process of variation. Now let's discuss about the importance of variation. Why variation is important? Why should it be important, especially in the reproductive process? Shall we get into the topic now? The variation helps organisms in multiple ways. They make the organism to fit in the environment, or in other words I can say they become the survival of the fittest, because they adapt, they acclimatize, they get acclimatized to the environment and they fit into that. So this variation is only a possible process by which it helps the new organism to fit into the environment. As a result, they become the fit of the fittest, and they also struggle for existence here. It normally helps to adapt according to the changes which takes place in the environment. It might be temperature, it can be the winds, it can be the rain, snow, whatsoever. The animals, plants, and also the higher organisms like humans, they help to adapt to the present situation, especially how the environment treats, they try to adapt because of the variation. And of course, this variation is very, very essential for the growth. And not only for the growth, only if the growth takes place, the reproduction, especially the asexual reproduction, can take place in a correct, significant way. And variation gives organism a particular quality or a distinct individuality to the organisms. So these are the importance of variations. The two types of reproduction are asexual and sexual reproduction, as shown in the figure. The asexual method is nothing but the offsprings. What are offsprings are? New individuals. The offsprings are produced by a single parent, which means there is no involvement of gametes, especially no sperms and eggs are needed in the asexual reproduction. So when you do a comparative study to the sexual reproduction, here the sexual reproduction involves the two distinct cells. The first one will be the male and the second one will be the female. So in case of male, it is the sperms, and in case of female, it is the ovum. The ovum is otherwise called as the egg. So let's categorize this asexual reproduction under 5 heads. The asexual reproduction can be divided under the first category called fission. So what is fission is? Fission is nothing but it is the splitting of a single cell, especially the splitting of a unicellular cell into two or more separate cells, or in other terms, two or more daughter cells, and that is called as splitting up of from one cell into two or more cell is called as a fission. Normally, a fission can be divided in two categories. The first one will be the binary fission. The second one will be the multiple fission. So what is binary fission is? Normally the binary fission takes place in the categories of amoeba, it takes place in euglena and algae and so on. Now let's discuss about the processes which involved in the binary fission. So the binary fission is nothing but it is a form of the asexual reproduction in which any organism or in which an organism divides into two. The organism will divide into two, each carrying a copy of its own or each carrying a copy of the genetic material, and this is called as the binary fission. So this type of fission is very common in the case of amoeba. When you take the amoeba, the next one will be, as you have seen in the figure, the euglena, the paramecium, and of course the ceratium. All these organisms, the lower kingdom of animals, they undergo the fission process, that is splitting from one cell into two types of daughter cells and producing the origin of its own, just like their parents, and that is called as a binary fission. This binary fission is also a form of the asexual reproduction. In this method, if you want to explain this method, now this method of asexual reproduction here, there is a separation. A separation takes place of the parent cells into two new daughter cells. And this process specially happens with the division, not only with the division but also with the duplication or with the multiplication of the parent's genetic material. So the multiplication takes place especially in the genetic material, and once after this takes place in the genetic matter, it again divides into two parts. That is, the parent cell will divide into two parts, and each daughter cell receives one copy of its parent DNA. So each copies of DNA, each cell or each daughter cell, they produce the identical gene or the same gene or a copy of gene from the parent DNA. So this is a common process which is seen in the binary fission. When you talk the binary fission in bacteria, even the bacteria experience this type of binary reproduction. The process of the binary reproduction especially takes place in the bacteria is very rapid. It will be very fast. And also it helps to speed up the speed up the process, especially among the species. The time is very important here. The reproduction, if you take the binary fission, the time plays a very important role here. The time which is required by the bacteria to develop itself or to double the number of cells it has is called as the doubling duration or the doubling time. The doubling duration or the doubling time. And, and further also, I can tell you that each species require a specific condition for growth. Each species, it can be a bacteria, it can be a protozoa, it can be anything. It requires a particular time or a particular condition for the growth. And of course, that condition includes the temperature. Of course, the temperature is very ideal here. The temperature, the pH level. The pH level is very important. Of course, the oxygen, the light, and of course the pressure, especially the osmotic pressure, how the liquids carry from the lower level to the higher level, and that is called as an osmotic pressure. All these favors the reproduction in bacteria. So when you take the reproduction, the steps which is involved in the bacteria, the first step will be the replication of the DNA. The DNA will start to divide, or it will start to double its content, the genetic content. The next stage will be the growth of a cell. So when you talk about the growth of the cell, after getting the exact copies right from the chromosomes, what happens is the bacteria starts to grow larger for the fission process. And what happens? It is followed by an increase in the cytoplasmic content. It's a liquid content. Cytoplasm is a liquid content and it's a living material. So what happens here is it increases in the cytoplasmic content. So after the cytoplasmic content, another phase or another a trait or another character of this stage is that two strands migrate to opposite poles of the cell. Of course, it forms to migrate in two opposite poles. So that is a growth of a cell. Next one will be the segregation. Segregation is to separate. The segregation of the DNA. The cells start to elongate or to become wider. The cell starts to elongate with a fission, especially with a septum or with a division. What is a septum is? A septum is nothing but a division. So here the cell elongates with a septum, therefore it forms in the middle. As you see in the figure, it forms in the middle, just like how you see in the type B there. It exactly forms in the middle. So the two chromosomes here also separates in this phase. So once this separates, the two chromosomes, which is the genetic material, also separates in this. The last stage in the binary fission, especially in bacteria, will be the splitting of the cells. So the new cell wall is formed after the segregation of the DNA. The new cell wall is formed at this phase, and what happens? The cell splits especially at the center. The cell splits at the center, dividing the parent cell into the daughter cell. So the cell divides from the parent cell into the new daughter cells. So what happens to the daughter cells here? This daughter cells, each of the daughter cells, they contain a copy of nucleus. especially the nuclear material, which is necessary for the organelles. So when you talk about the organelles, it is the mitochondria, the endoplasmic reticulum, the ribosomes, the Golgi complex. All these are the organelles. So here what happens, each of the daughter cells, they contain a copy of the nucleus material as it is necessary for what? As it is necessary for the organelles. Now let's talk about or discuss about the amoeba. When you talk about the amoeba, which involves in this reproduction, as all of us know, amoeba is a unicellular organism. And what happens, here also the fission is exactly the same as how it happened in a bacteria, and there is no difference at all. It reproduces through the binary fission. In amoeba, the reproduction takes place in form of a binary fission. And after replicating or after dividing or after multiplying, you can say in any terms, after replicating its material, especially the genetic material, through the mitotic phase. What is mitosis? When I am telling here, the cell can divide under two categories. The first one will be the mitosis and the meiosis. The mitosis, as the term mitosis, the mitosis can divide. In this process, the cell can divide. A cell will divide into two daughter cells. Okay, and it represents 2n, a diploid. So in case of sexual reproduction, it is not mitotic, it is meiosis or a meiotic process, where 4n is formed, especially 4 daughter cells are formed. And that meiosis normally takes place in the reproductive phase. And in asexual reproduction, it is the meiosis which takes place. So here in amoeba also, meiosis cell division takes place. So the cell will divide into two daughter cells. After the division, what happens in this method? Two similar individuals, that is two similar or the same individuals. I said it will be as the same as that of a mother or that of a parent, I told you. It will depict or it will take the same features. There is no variation. Only in sexual reproduction you can see the variation. But when you take in asexual reproduction, there is no variation. It is just the same. It will produce the same copies as that of the parent cell. So in this process also what happens is, this amoeba, the two similar cells, especially the two similar individuals, are produced in this method from the single parent. An amoeba are produced from the single parent cells, and of course what happens, it is about to undergo a process or a division. And this division grows larger and larger. It grows larger, and eventually what happens, its nucleus, especially the nucleus, extends. The nuclear part extends. It extends itself and it divides to form two daughter cells. It extends and divides its cell to form two daughter cells. And this division will be very large, and it will consist of the division of cytoplasm, especially follows the division of the nucleus. What is a cytoplasm? It is a liquid which is found inside the cell. Okay, now this will follow the division of the nucleus. So once it follows the nucleus, the two amoebas or the resultant, the result product of this reproduction in this phase, two amoebas, you have to say like that, two amoebas are produced from a single parent. So two amoebas are produced from a single parent, and the parent's identity or the parent's feature, in other ways I can say the parent's feature is lost here. Okay, so this is the reproduction. It's a common binary fission which happens in the amoeba. So the next part of the asexual reproduction will be the multiple fission, and this multiple fission is normally takes place in plasmodium. Okay, so let's discuss about what exactly the process is involved in multiple fission. So as you see in the figure there, a parent cell. The parent cell has a definite nucleus. So what happens here is the parent cell forms a cyst during the unfavorable condition, just as you see in the second figure there. It forms a cyst during the unfavorable condition. That is, when the condition does not favor the organism during that time, it forms a cyst. The nucleus of the parents, especially the nucleus which is seen inside, as you see in the first figure there, the nucleus of the parent cell, it divides several times. That is why this process is called as multiple fission. When we compare to that of binary, binary can happen only one cell will split into two daughter cells we learned. But in multiple fission, it is not such kind. The parent cell will form a cyst and that will divide into many. The nucleus of the parent cell especially, it will divide into several times inside the cyst. After that, what happens? It produces a large number of nuclei, as you see in the figure. Many nuclei is contained in the cyst. It produces a large number of nuclei called the daughter nuclei. It is called as a daughter nuclei. So each daughter nuclei, what happens is it accumulates or it comes together. These daughter nucleus, they all, what happens is it accumulates as a small amount of cytoplasm. I already told you cytoplasm is a living material. Okay, each of them is surrounded by a thin membrane. So when you talk about this each daughter nucleus, each of them is surrounded by a thin nuclear membrane. So what happens? Numerous daughter cells, as you can see in the picture there, numerous daughter cells are seen within the cyst. They are seen. As a result, numerous daughter cells are formed within the cyst. When the feral condition comes, especially maybe the temperature, maybe the pH, maybe the sunlight, oxygen, all these are feral condition. When this feral condition occurs, what happens exactly? As a result, what happens? The daughter cells are released from the parent. That is, the cyst breaks and the daughter cells, you can see in the third picture there, the cyst breaks out and the daughter cells are released. Now, when you talk the identity of the daughter cells, all the daughter cells are identical. I repeat again, all the daughter cells, they are very, very identical. And each daughter cells creates a new organism. So, when you take one, because each cell has a nucleus. When you see in the figure, the third figure there, the cyst breaks and all the daughter cells are released, right? So when you see in between, especially in between, take one cyst and see, the daughter cells has a definite nucleus. Okay, so all these, each daughter cells, they create a new organism. As a result, this multiple fission produces large number of offspring, and that is the reason it got the term multiple fission. The best example of the multiple fission will be the plasmodium. Now let's take the next process, which is called as the budding. So this budding is very, very common in the case of hydra. So what is hydra is? Hydra is nothing but it is a freshwater organism. It's a plant and it's a freshwater organism. As you see in the picture, it is made up of a tube-like body and it is composed of a head. Of course, it has a foot especially at the end. Okay, and the reproduction normally takes place in the process of budding. So let's see what are the processes which involved. So budding, what is a budding is? Budding is also a type of a asexual reproduction. In hydra, the bud is developed or the bud is produced as an outgrowth How is bud produced? Bud is produced as a outgrowth due to the repetitive cell division. You can see in the second figure there, exactly the second figure, you can see an outgrowth, right? You have the tentacles and all that, but in the stem of the hydra, you can see a small bud arising, a body is arising, right? So that is called as a bud, that is the growth of the bud. So a bud is developed as a outgrowth due to the repetitive cell divisions. And what happens? Now the nutrition or the food supply, for the bud growth is provided by the parent itself. It is provided by the parent itself. And what happens here? The development is showed by the bud part starts to develop. How does it develop? The bud part, it starts to develop as a small outgrowth. Okay, it start to develop as a small outgrowth, especially as a small tentacles. You can see in the third figure there. This bud start to emerge with a small tentacles there. And of course, what happens? And it forms, as soon as it forms the tentacles, the mouth starts to develop. So the third figure, as you see, the bud develops the mouth and the tentacle. So the nutrition, the food supply, everything is got from the parent, especially from the mother, from the parent cell. Okay, we are not supposed to say mother, because as we said, there is no involvement of sperm or egg, right? So we have said you have to say from the parent, that's all. You have to say from a parent. The nutrition is got from the parent itself. So as a result, the bud starts to develop with the mouth and with beautiful small tentacles. So after which what happens? After it develops, after it fully develops, the fully grown bud, you can see in the last figure there, the fully grown bud, it detaches or it separates itself from the parent body, and it becomes as an independent organism, and this process is called as budding. The next method will be the fragmentation in planaria. So fragmentation is also a method of asexual reproduction, where the organisms, they reproduce by the process of splitting themselves into fragments. What are fragments? Fragments are bits. Okay, they separate themselves by the fragments, and each fragments, what happens again, they grow into a new individual or a new individual organisms. That is a basic concept of fragmentation. So here, as you see in the figure here, the parent planaria, when you take the parent planaria and when you cut it, especially in divisions or in fragments, each fragment, in the second picture you can see the planaria is cut into divisions, right, as head, body and the lower part, the tail part. Now what happens? It did not go like that, but again it started to develop into a new individual, which means the head gives rise to a full body, the middle part of the body again divided into a full formed body, and of course the tail part again to form the full formed daughter planarias. So this is very, very evident in the case of planaria. The next part of slide will be the fragmentation in Spirogyra. How the Spirogyra gets split into two from the parent. So this fragmentation is very, very normal and evident, which occurs in an organism where the organism breaks itself. What happens here? The organism breaks itself, and this broken fragments of the organism, they give rise to the new individual, and that is called as the fragmentation in Spirogyra. In this method, what is the main concept of this method? In this method, what happens? Some species, especially some multicellular. What are multicellular? Multicellular species having many cells. So some multicellular species, what happens with some body structures can reproduce. It is some multicellular organisms can reproduce with their body structures, and that is a main theme of this fragmentation in Spirogyra. So in this fragmentation, the first step which involves in Spirogyra is that the asexual reproduction takes place in the Spirogyra, where it undergoes fragmentations, which means many divisions. So the filament, as you see in the figure there, the filament, what happens? It breaks into several parts, and each several parts, they grow in turn as a new individual. So that is the main concept in the fragmentation. So the vegetative filament here, what happens? It transforms, or it gets transformation, or it is transformed into a new species or into a new filament following the fragmentation. Why? Why does it has to go? Because in order to form a new filament, in order to form a new species, or in order to form a new filament, each fragment undergoes different divisions, and after it goes different divisions, it elongates. So that is the main concept which is left behind with the fragmentation in Spirogyra. So what happens here is it splits into filament. Okay, once it splits into the filament, this Spirogyra, it reproduces. After the reproduces, these filament later again develop into a matured one. So this is the main process which is involved in the fragmentation, and as you see, from the vegetative filament, when you cut, it will give rise into two different fragments of Spirogyra. The next topic will be the spore formation in fungus, that is especially in Rhizopus. So what a spore is? Spores are nothing but they are the haploid unicellular body, that is many pores which consist of a cell, a single cell, unicellular body. Normally in this process, what happens? The formation of the spores is referred to as the sporangiogenesis. Here, the spores are haploid, I said. As a result, they are haploid and they are unicellular bodies. Now, what are they produce? They produce as a result of the asexual reproduction, especially in algae, in bacteria, in fungi, and in some parts of the plants. So what happens exactly here? The spores are the reproductive cells. First and foremost, these spores are the reproductive cells, and they are highly capable of giving rise to new organisms. They are highly capable of giving rise to new organisms, and they are compared to as a gametes. These spores, in other ways I can say, they are compared to that of gametes that require to fuse. What is fuses? To unite. Fuse is nothing but to unite. To unite with another gamete. So once it unites with another gamete, it gives rise to a new individual. So that is the formation of spores, especially which involves in the case of fungus, especially in Rhizopus. So in the spore formation is a method of the asexual reproduction. It's very common and we all know it. What happens? Many spores, as you see in the figure there, many spores are stored. Okay, many spores are stored in a sac. And what is that called as? The sporangia. The spores are stored in the sac-like structure. That is called as a sporangia. So during the ferule condition, this sporangia, what will happen? It will burst. So what will happen? It will burst. Once it bursts, minute spores or minute single cell, they are released. Okay, and they are released as a result. So what happens during the ferule condition? They develop into a new plant or a new individual. So this is the basic process in the spore formation. The natural vegetative propagation is the next subtopic. So what is this? In natural propagation, what is propagation is? It is also a reproduction. What happens exactly is, in this reproduction occurs when the axillary bud, with the small bud, the axillary bud, what happens? It grows into the shoots, the lateral shoots especially. And what happens? This lateral shoot again develop into a fully formed roots, and this process is called as the adventitious root. So thus the plant structures allows the natural vegetative propagation, which includes the like the bulbs, the rhizomes, okay, the stolon, the tubers, and so on. Okay, so in this session, in this complete session, we saw about what is reproduction is, why should the reproduction is important, and during the process of reproduction, what happens exactly. Are the organisms, are they identical to each other? And we also saw about the variation. What is variation and the importance of variation? We also saw about the important structures, especially the reproductive structures like the asexual and the sexual. In asexual reproduction, we saw about the different categories right from fission. What is fission is, and how the fission can be again divided into the fission, the binary fission and the multiple fission. And of course, we also saw about the budding in hydra. We saw about the fragmentation in Spirogyra, and we also saw about the natural vegetative propagation. We also saw the planaria, how the fragmentation takes place or the regeneration takes place. When you cut the planaria, how it grows into a different plant body having the same kind of that of a parent. So children, I hope this session was a very useful one for you. Okay, if you like this video, please share the video, subscribe to our channel, to Xion, and of course, don't forget to hit the thumbs up button there. So do follow us and stay tuned with our channel to Xion. Until then, it's me signing off. Meet you all soon in the second video. Take care, children.